The pride, passion, and pageantry of college football lives here. This is the Paul Finebaum Show, Hour 2 podcast.
The second hour is live and underway. We appreciate you being here. We mentioned in the first hour the passing of Don Shula, the legendary Miami Dolphins coach, today at the age of 90, the winningest coach in NFL history. Let's continue with more phone calls, and William is up next. William, let me get William back here. William is in Florida. Hey, William.
Paul.
Hi there. Good afternoon.
Hey. Well, I'm just didn't call about Don Shula, but I wanted to let you know my father was a Colts fan when I was a Packers fan. And then all of a sudden Don Shula, and we were at odds, all of a sudden Don Shula went to Miami, and then we loved each other, and it's the rest
That's
is
great.
history. But anyway, here's what I'm calling about. And I'm kind of serious about this, and this has nothing to do with COVID. Okay, what about a player that gets to get money for his likeness? In capitalism, that sounds to me perfectly okay. Versus, they don't play in the ball game, Paul. So they make all this money off, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and then they don't play in the ball game. What kind of contract? I mean, I'm a forensic CPA, but I'm way retired. But what kind of contract are they going to have? Guy's got a bum knee, yet he sits out. But he's already made I don't know how much they're going to make. I have no clue. That's all I got.
Thank you very much. Let's continue with Phil. Phil is in Jacksonville. Hey, Phil, go right ahead.
Paul, good afternoon. I would like to tie Don Shula to the SEC, and it was a very brief moment, but it was probably the most important year of his career going forward, and that was in 1959 when Blanton Collier, who succeeded Bear Bryant at Kentucky, hired Chuck Knox and Don Shula. Don Shula was a defensive backs coach. He was only there for 1 year, but he made a connection with the guy that probably advanced his career greater than anyone, and that is Bill Arnsparger.
Oh yeah, well, absolutely. I got to know Coach Arnsparger when he was at LSU, and he always talked about Don Shula.
Yeah, and they really hit it off the 1 year that Don Shula was in Lexington. And oddly enough, if you ask the right question of SEC fans, and you can trick a lot of people because you have to ask who is the only SEC head coach to ever go on to win an NFL championship. And the reason you have to ask it that way is Blanton Collier was fired after the 61 season in Lexington, and he went up to Cleveland and took Arnsparger with him, and he succeeded Paul Brown when he was fired, and they won the NFL championship in 64, ironically beating Don Shula and the Colts.
Exactly. Hey, by the way, you sound like you know your football. Shula was hired to be the Dolphins coach. He was not the first choice. You know who was?
Bear Bryant.
Yep. Great story.
Danny Thomas, the owner, and Danny Thomas. And tell me, you're an Alabama guy, indirectly, of course. Paul Bryant thought about that for a little bit, didn't he?
He was offered the job by, I believe it was Joe Robbie, and he had decided, based on what I've read and talked to people about, he decided to take the job, and I think the president of the university, I think his name was Dr. Rose at the time. I think
you're right.
Could have been, anyway, my memory on that is not clear. Said, I will let you go if you can get me a suitable replacement or something along those lines. And I believe Bryant called two people. I think it was John McKay and Charlie McClendon, who was the LSU coach at the time, and they both turned him down, and he ended up staying.
Charlie McClendon was one of Bear's boys at Kentucky.
He sure was. I got to know
Charlie Bradshaw, who succeeded Blanton Collier was, I'm going to call him Paul Bryant out of just great respect.
Yeah, no, that's what he was known back then.
Absolutely. And Charlie Bradshaw was Bryant's defensive coordinator at Alabama.
Right.
And then he came to Kentucky and ran a camp that was so bad it got Kentucky on probation.
Yeah. No, I knew him moderately well. I knew Coach McClendon even better, and you got an incredible recall of that period. Hey, thank you very much for the call, Phil. Let's check in with Steve, who is in Alabama. Hey, Steve.
Hey, what's going on, Paul?
We are doing great.
Well, I'm glad you're doing great. I love your show. This is the second time I'm calling in, and I just wanted to know, man, if the college football thing does, as we all hope, ends up panning out and goes through, who do you see getting in the playoff this year? And then I had a second question for you on top of that. Are you interested in this, the whole Last Dance thing that they got on ESPN right now?
I have not had a chance to see it yet. Everyone says it's great. I'm sure I'll catch up with it at some point.
It's all right, man. I don't know. That's why I wanted your opinion.
Yeah, I was around Michael Jordan one year, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
As far as the playoff, I really like Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama right now. I'm still not sold on a fourth team. By the way, the president of Alabama at the time was David Matthews, who later went on to I think he served in someone's cabinet, maybe Ford, I can't remember. According to apparently Bryant took the job initially and then backed out, but he was talked out of it. But it turned out well for Joe. It turned out well for Don Shula. And it turned out pretty well for Coach Bryant, who had the most amazing run ever during the 70s. Let's continue with more calls. Doug is in South Carolina. Hello, Doug.
Hey, Paul. How you doing today?
I am really well, thank you.
Yeah, I was just sitting here thinking about the upcoming football season. I believe the college presidents have already done made statement, unless the students are going to be back on campus, there is not going to be any college football. And then why would you want to have it if you couldn't have the students back on campus? But if they do get back on campus, ESPN could run a pay-per-view thing, and they could socially distance the stadiums to where they could service the alumni and the big boosters and stuff, and still have college football. It just would have a different landscape. What are your feeling on that?
Yeah, I'm still not sure how that's going to work. Doug, what everyone seems to be saying, and then the Big Ten Commissioner, Kevin Warren, talked today about it. He said they are gearing toward a decision within 6 weeks. They have to make a decision early June, and but I do not know what they're going to do. By the way, one more thing on the not to get too deep into this because everyone has a different recollection. But in Bryant's autobiography, he said they actually had drawn up a contract with Joe Robbie in Birmingham at a hotel. He said he agreed to take the job. Think about this in 1969. It was a 5-year deal for $1.7 million. And he had agreed to take it, and then obviously backed away. We're up against a break. We will take more of your phone calls at 855-242-7285.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Welcome back to the program on a Monday. Coach is up next in Georgia. Hey, Coach, welcome to the program. Good afternoon.
Hey, Paul. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to share a story about an encounter I had with Don Shula 40 years ago.
Sure.
I went to the University of Tennessee at Martin.
Of course.
Back in 1975. George McIntyre signed me. I was on football scholarship. I played 2 years, and I was transferring to Florida State. And in the meantime, I wrote Coach Shula a letter asking him about off-season programs and, what I could do to really better myself. And he wrote me back. He wrote me a really nice letter and answered some of my questions. And, of course, this was way before email, way before cell phones, that type thing. But I thought it was very classy of a Super Bowl winning coach to write a little college sophomore, give him some advice on preparing for Division I football.
Right. That is pretty amazing.
Great guy. And I wanted you to know I've come out of retirement. I've actually been out 2 years, had 2 good years, and I guess I'm going to keep rolling along. Can't stay retired. So,
well, I'm curious on that because everyone goes through it in different fields. But I would think coaching is one of the most difficult ones to let go.
Well, you never get it out of your blood, Paul. I mean, it's always there. And, we're all kind of crazy. I tell people that. We're doodling on anything we can, and you're always thinking about, the game's always evolving, and it's a lot of work now. Don't get me wrong. It's a tough job, but it's a fun job and a very rewarding job. And, most of us like me, I graduated college at about 23, 24 years old. So you put your 30 years in, and you're still a relatively young man, at 53, 54 years old. And I know, at the time I retired, I thought I was ready to retire. It didn't take 6 months that I was ready to find another job. And fortunately, my hometown called me, and I've gone back to my home. I commute every day, but I've gone back to my home school. It's been kind of neat. I joke about it. I see kids that look familiar, and sometimes I know their parents, sometimes I know their grandparents, and sometimes I know their great-grandparents.
That is amazing.
It's been kind of a neat experience. Yeah.
Well, tell me if this is. I was talking to a very well-known coach one time who had a really good gig, and he kept trying to go back. And I said, "Why do you go back? Is it the winning?" He said, "It's not the winning." He said, "That's not it." He said, "It's just the competition. I mean, we're judged on our whole life. We're trying to, from the first time we played football to the last game we coached, we're trying to win. It's winning or losing. There's a measurement. There's a scoreboard. What I'm doing now, there's no scoreboard."
Well, it's just you can't compare the highs you have in coaching. I mean, the association with the other coaches, the fellowship with the players, the association with the teachers. And when it's good, it's great. Now, I've been on both sides of the spectrum, unfortunately. Sure. But, I was talking to a friend of mine, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but, I've had a great career, a wonderful life. I was telling my wife, if I could start it all over again, if I could go back at 18 or 19 or whatever, entering college, I don't think I'd do anything different. I mean, we've got a good retirement. I've worked with great people. I've had an opportunity. I've been privileged to work and coach great athletes. And some of the kids I've worked with were not great athletes, but they were great people. And we've lost some, and we've won some. I've been fortunate. We've been 15-0 3 times. We played for 5 state championships. So I count myself very lucky in that regard. And we won 10 region championships. So, we've had some success. Now, we've had some tough years as well.
Oh, sure.
But it's a great career, and I love it. And I tell our young coaches all the time, or tell people that are graduating, I'm talking to 2 prospective young coaches now that have just, one graduated from Florida State and one graduated from Tennessee State. And, one was like a special operations coach in Utah, wanting to get in high school coaching. I said, well, you're never going to be a rich man. But if you take care of yourself, you do the right thing, you got a degree, you get a coaching, you can take care of yourself and your family and live a great life. Like I said, I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. And, back in the day, I thought of trying to get into college coaching, but, hey, I'm geared for high school coaching. That's just what the Lord created me to do, and I love it, and I'm going to do it as long as I can.
Well, you be well out there, Coach, and thanks for sharing that story. That really is an amazing tale. Great to have you on. Dan is up next in Louisiana. Hello, Dan.
Hey, Paul. Hope you're doing good today.
We are.
Thank you. Paul, just listening to everything and going through all this, it just makes me realize how much we really do need each other. Jim needs our man and Squirrel, and our man and Squirrel need Jim, and I just wonder if we're realizing just how much we depend on other people for our personal success. Are we learning that?
Well, I think sometimes I'll give you a general comment, but I think sometimes we don't realize that we need anyone else until we're in trouble. And anyone out there who has ever been sick, ill, critically or not, finds out pretty quickly it's hard to get around. And I think that's something that a lot of young people do not understand, and understandably so. I didn't understand it, but you think about what's going on right now, and we are finding out. We spent the first couple of weeks talking to a number of people, whether it's a delivery driver or a truck driver or a checkout person at the grocery store or a police or fireman. It doesn't matter. We spend a lot of time praising the scientists and the doctors, and they certainly deserve it. But it's just a lot of average folks, Dan, who have made this country great and are keeping it running right now.
Right. Amen. I hope we all realize that. It's normally the working people, the common people.
Yeah, they're forgotten about very quickly, but but it's. The things that we've all encountered over these 8 weeks, the things that we thought were important aren't, and the little things that we never gave 1 second thought about have suddenly become very, very critical. Thank you for the call. Steve is up next, and Steve is in Virginia. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Paul. How you doing today, man?
We are doing great.
Good. I've been listening to your show. I've been laying down watching your show, listening to your show after it's over with, and I just want to thank you for bringing on guests. I think it makes it really entertaining.
Thank you very much for saying that.
I'm in Royal, Virginia, close to Blacksburg. We're not really hit that bad with the COVID-19, and I'm not trying to get political, but I watched CNN, and there was a news article came out from the New York Times today. And unfortunately, the model has gotten worse. The model on there, and it's projecting like 3,000 deaths per day. And I just really think that might put a damper on things. And
I saw that article. I try to consume everything imaginable, and I think that was based on underestimates, but I don't think that's a long-term model. And there are a lot of things that could go wrong, Steve, but the most important thing, I think, is how we all handle the next couple of weeks. What I mean by that is when we all start getting out more than we have gotten out, and if we can get through this initial period with some success, then I think we're going to be okay.
I definitely agree on that, Paul.
But that requires what our last caller said. People have to be responsible. You can't be reckless. And I'm not here to lecture anyone.
What did the last caller say?
Well, he was talking about how we all need each other, and we do. But if I walk in a place and you're sick and you're not covered, and the danger is obvious. You have to be responsible for yourself and think about someone else as you're going out. That's my only message, Stephen.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you.
Listen,
so
you
much,
take care of
Paul.
yourself, and I appreciate your call. Thank you very, very much. We're up against a break. We have a couple of guests coming up, and we will be back after this.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
You're not worth a thrill.
We welcome you back, and I know we've had a lot of conversations about what if Understandably so, but our next conversation is about what has happened in the past and how it may portend the future. Remember when the spread was the cool thing? Bill Connelly has done a deep dive into it under the heading How the Spread Offense Conquered College Football, from Hal Mumme to Joe Burrow. But he is also giving a eulogy for it as we say hello to Bill. Bill, thanks for the time. Great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
So, I mean, I know we're all kind of dealing with interesting times, but I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to get out of your way. What prompted you to do a deep dive, or was it the eulogy that I mentioned early on? That was time to say goodbye to the spread after what happened this last year with LSU.
Yeah, no, it was, I think, late in the season, the 38th time that we were writing about how amazing it was that LSU changed things up, and suddenly it freed them, and suddenly all their players were better, and it was beautiful. I started to realize, at that point, Georgia's like the only heavyweight left that isn't running their own interpretation of the spread, and that might change this coming season as well. And so if all the heavyweights are running it, it's the offense. If all the number one picks in the NFL draft are spread quarterbacks, it's the pro-style offense. And it just kind of – I filed that one away to explore in the offseason, and a very good opportunity. A nice amount of time presented itself to explore it.
Yeah, and it seems that this thing has had so many different iterations. And now, if you look at the NFL, you look at as you mentioned, college football. Let's go back because we hear you mentioned Hal Mumme. He was a familiar name about 25 years ago. Mike Leach, of course, part of that operation. I mean, the spread didn't start there. Take us through the evolution of this because it's so interesting to go back and hear how these things began.
It was fun talking to a bunch of coaches about this for this piece too, just to see how they framed it in their own minds. And it really kind of it took shape. There were basically two main branches. There was the Hal Mumme air raid. It's okay to spread the field all the way horizontally, all the way vertically. Make the defenders, defend the entire field. Make sure that everybody knows it's okay to pass 50, 60 times if you have to. There was that branch of it, and of course that has sprouted all sorts of successors, be it the Lincoln Rileys and the Dana Holgorsons, et cetera. The coaching tree there is enormous. And then on the other side, you had Rich Rodriguez discovering the zone read, basically, holing up at NAIA Glenville State in the early 90s, deciding to use tempo because he hated defending tempo when he was a player, stumbling across the zone read concept when his quarterback bobbled a snap and decided to keep the ball and run upfield with it. All those things came together to create its own version of just a dangerous offense. And then by the late 90s, Rich Rodriguez is at Tulane and then Clemson. Hal Mumme's at Kentucky, then Mike Leach is at Oklahoma, and it just blossomed kind of two different paths at the same time.
And of course, after it's interesting because there was also Tommy Bowden in there, and then Tommy Bowden gave way to Dabo Swinney. I mean, it is crazy. And you mentioned Nick Saban in there, who seemed like he resisted it for a long time, and then until he didn't.
Right. I have a piece coming out tomorrow, kind of the second half of this, basically the 25 most important games of the spread revolution. I swear like 6 of them are Nick Saban losses. Just, it was the up-and-comer beating the
Has he had more than 6 losses? I mean, you pretty much covered the whole let's move around a little bit because because as you mentioned, everyone led to something else. Mumme. The Mumme tree is really interesting because we got quite a few coaches from there.
Oh yeah. Obviously it starts with Leach, but when Leach leaves, one of the most interesting developments, and really I didn't piece this all together until I started talking to people for this piece. Mike Leach leaves Oklahoma after 1 year as assistant. Mark Mangino takes over. They win the national title in 2000. Mangino becomes Kansas's coach. And Bob Stoops decides he wants to be able to run the ball a little bit more, so he brings in Kevin Wilson from Northwestern. Now, Northwestern they exploded in 2000 by adopting a lot of Rich Rodriguez's principles. And so Kevin Wilson suddenly comes to install a Rodriguez running game with a Mike Leach passing game. And that really kind of created a lot of the, whatever word you want to use here, synergy and whatnot, to where all these concepts started blending together a little bit. And I think that was a really big piece, and it came from, Mike Leach wasn't even there at that point, but it came from just the combination of the great talent they could bring in at OU and these two different ideas that started to meld together a little bit.
Talking about the evolution of the spread, have you in all the reporting that you did, would you agree with what everyone else has said, that this was the personification of it this year with Joe Burrow?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it just seemed like the logical conclusion, right? Like, now it's not the spread, it's just the offense. It's just the college football offense, because what can you do better than LSU did last year? I mean, there's been a lot of, best team ever kind of talk, and I think by the end of the season you could make that case, but it's their defense struggled for a good portion of the year, but the offense was just perfect. They only got challenged a couple of times. I talked in the piece today about how Kevin Steele and Auburn tried to limit big plays and do a few things a little different than a lot of teams did, and had some success, and LSU barely survived that test. But beyond that, I mean, every game was 37 points or above besides the Auburn game, just crazy number of yards, and whatever you stopped, they would just do the other thing. They would just keep right on working.
And I want to ask you about the Auburn game, because you interviewed Kevin Steele in your piece, who was a longtime Nick Saban assistant as well, before going to Clemson. What did he do that day at Tiger Stadium? I remember I was down there. It was a gray, dreary day, and actually, I take it back. The sun came out as the game was starting. But it was fairly gray for LSU, though, because they did not have a vintage afternoon.
Well, the one thing Kevin Steele will always tell you is, it comes back to talent in the end. Like, you can try to do whatever you want, but if you don't have the talent for it, it's not going to matter. But what they had was, they just had a vision of playing as many DBs as possible. Putting defensive backs at the outside linebacker spot, playing 6-7 DBs, so that they could cover everybody well. And he said he thought that kind of gives you a little bit of an advantage, because the quarterback's just reading the field. He's got a slot receiver there. He's probably thinking that guy's being covered by a linebacker, but in this case he wasn't. He was, another safety or a corner or something. So they covered really well, but because they had a really good defensive line also, they were able to hold up against the run, because that's obviously why teams don't go to a dime defense all the time, is you can just push them over. You can run on them all day, but they were able to hold up in that regard. And they basically limited big plays and forced LSU to go to plan C and plan D. Burrow had to run a lot and make those types of plays on his own, and he did it, and therefore they won. But they had to work probably harder in that game. They had to go further into the playbook in that game than any other.
Bill, I don't want to upstage your piece tomorrow, but give us a preview of what we'll see tomorrow.
Oh, man, this was one of the more fun pieces. Today's piece was fun, too, but just getting to walk through, I went in chronological order. I started with one of the games that Hal Mumme said was one of his inspirations, the BYU-SMU Holiday Bowl in 1980, the last-second win for BYU. And it's worked chronologically through Mumme's first win at Iowa Wesleyan, one of Rich Rodriguez's big moments at Glenville State, and then just all the way through Northwestern Michigan in 2000, a lot of Big 12 games in the late 2000s and early 2010s, and on through one of the Alabama-Clemson games, Alabama winning the national title by running 4 verticals, basically, which is, one of the staple air raid plays. It was a really, really fun piece to put together. Obviously, the last one was going to be LSU-Alabama, since that was kind of the whole genesis of the piece. But I like it. I hope other people do, too.
Well, we appreciate you coming on, and it will be out tomorrow. Bill, thanks very much. Come back soon. Be well.
Absolutely. You too.
Great stuff. Really cool. Bill Connelly talking to us about the evolution of the spread, which really isn't the spread anymore, as he said. It's just the college football offense. We are going to take a break. More phone calls at 855-242-7285. More guests to come as well.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Geico has the insurance industry-leading app that lets you manage your policy anytime, anywhere. Which means that Geico is always there for you. If only everyone was always there for you. Like animal control, when you're cornered in your garage by an angry possum.
Hi, me again. You guys said you would be here about an hour ago, and I think the possum is starting to get angry. Listen, I thought if I fed it, it would go away, but now it is ripping holes in the drywall and making some sort of nest. Just call me back.
Geico, always there for you with savings and the industry-leading mobile app.
Rama is up next in Louisiana. Hello, Rama.
Hey, how you doing there, Paul?
We are doing great, thank you.
I heard them struggling to find a name for that new offense there LSU came up with last year.
So what should we call it?
I call it the spread and shred.
That's pretty good.
Hey, I'm seeing a propensity for getting track stars on the teams now. That Coach Orgeron's in Texas recruiting all the combination track star football players.
Oh, really?
That's it. And I'm like, wow, football's changing. So, it's like, what do you think it's?
There was a time 40, 50 years ago they used to use a lot of wide receivers were sprinters, but they got away from it.
Well, it's maybe a big circle. Anyway, what do you think? You think this year that just passed, you think that's going to be, you think we'll have more 50 touchdown seasons coming up in the next decade or what? Joe Burrow didn't have that great an arm.
Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to have anything quite like that again.
No.
But I do think, and it's everywhere, whether it's Mahomes in the NFL or what we just got through watching. Now, what I'm interested in is the other side of it, is where our defense is now in trying to contain it.
Well, they're looking for guys like Marcel Brooks.
Yeah.
They're taking guys like Devonta Lee and switching them over from wide receiver, putting them at linebacker. They're doing some flipped out stuff there to get these linebackers to keep up with tight ends and receivers.
Yeah, and it's just amazing that every couple of years you start to see the elite programs change. I know Saban went through that. He went for the fast guys, and that didn't work. I mean, it's always it's the quintessential cat chasing tail. Hey, thanks for the call. Really do appreciate it. Robert is in Birmingham. Hello, Robert.
Hey, how you doing, Paul?
We are really doing well. Thank you.
Listen, I wanted to, I watched a movie this weekend I hadn't seen in a long time called Capote. And I remember a few years back, you were either trying to meet or had an opportunity to meet Nell Harper Lee, who was one of the characters in the show, in the movie. Did you ever meet her?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for those who are not following this very closely, Nell Harper Lee, is one of the most mysterious figures in literary history. She wrote, arguably considered one of the greatest books ever in this country or any country's history, To Kill a Mockingbird. There were rumors for many, many years that her childhood friend, Truman Capote, was the actual writer of it. So forget all that. But if you've never read To Kill a Mockingbird, run out and get it during this time. It's an epic book. I happened to see the play on Broadway this past summer, and it was pretty amazing to see it. Okay, now here's the story. I've never met her. She was a recluse. She did not give interviews. And in September of this year, a writer for the Wall Street Journal named Ben Cohen called me one day. I know Ben. He said, "Did you ever interview Harper Lee?" I said, "No, I didn't." I said, "My best Harper Lee story was that a guy that I worked with was related to her, like her great nephew or something, and he told me once that she listened to our show, and I must admit I'm not sure whether I believed it or not. But I gave him a story that Pat Dye was on the program once, and Pat Dye said that he had met her He'd gone to her house. Wayne, I think it was Wayne Flynn or somebody, the professor at Auburn, set it up, who was friends with her. I know I'm rambling here, but there's a point to all this. Coach Dye told her that he certainly enjoyed reading To Kill a Blackbird, completely missing the title of the most famous book in American fiction. So anyway, Ben Cohn calls me back about a week later and said, "You're not going to believe this, but I interviewed her attorney, and this is all going to be in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow."
Oh.
Harper Lee, not tomorrow. I mean, this was back in September. He said, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Harper Lee, who lived in Monroeville, Alabama, used to listen to your show every day, that she was an avid, fanatical Alabama fan, and she got hooked on your show. She listened to it every day." And I was starting to think, so she sits there and listens to all these crazy calls, and it was like I was really in shock. And if you don't know the story, you wouldn't really understand it. But you just young people, I strongly advise you to read this book that she wrote.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was really cool. It came out, and I still have occasionally I'll have a friend in the literary world will come up to me and they'll say, "I still can't believe that Harper Lee." Who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, and who she passed away about 3 years ago, who is the all-time recluse, was sitting there listening to I-Man or Jim or anyone else who calls this show. But anyway, I know I've rambled way too far, but thanks for bringing that up, Robert. I don't know if I've ever completely told that story. We had Ben on last September, but it was right in the middle of the football season, but it is a book that everyone and pretty much everyone that grew up from the 60s on would read. But we will take a short break. It's a couple hours to go. We're back after this.